Welcome, and thank you for joining today's MTW Landlord Incentives Cohort Evaluation webinar. Before we begin, please ensure you've opened the WebEx chat panel by using the associated icon on the bottom right corner of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted until the Q&A portion of the call. You are, however, welcome to submit written questions throughout the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To submit your questions in writing, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Marian Nazaro, Director of the Moving to Work program. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you MTW agencies are doing well. This is kind of the next in our series of webinars, kind of getting you onboarded and ready to become a full-fledged MTW agency. I just wanted to say hello. Hope everybody is doing well. If you have any questions whatsoever, please definitely contact that MTW Landlord Incentives mailbox, and we will get right back to you. Today, we are very happy to introduce our partners at Apt Associates, who will be taking the lead on the evaluation portion for your cohort, and they'll kind of walk through kind of what the expectations are during this afternoon's session. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Meryl Finkel with Apt Associates to kind of introduce all the speakers and get us started. Meryl?
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Marianne. So I just wanted to go over the agenda briefly. Well, first we'll do introductions, then I'll present an evaluation overview, and then we'll describe what it means for you to be part of, you as the PHAs to be part of the evaluation, and then we'll talk about the timeline and next steps. And finally, we'll make sure to leave enough time for questions at the end. So I am Meryl Finkel. I am a principal associate at Apt Associates. I've been at Apt for over 30 years. I've been studying various aspects of the Housing Choice Voucher program for my entire career at Apt, looking at success rates, at landlord motivations for participating in the program, at voucher utilization, at administrative costs in the voucher program, at small area FMR demonstration, and so really the full gamut of things associated with the voucher program. And I'll turn it over to Anna Mahathi next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Mahathi. I am an associate at Apt and have been here for about 4 years. I work on a range of housing and homelessness research and technical assistance projects. And on this project, I will be the assistant study project manager. I'm really excited to work with you all over the next few years. I will pass it to Larry now.
Hi, I'm Larry Buron. I am been at Apt also for 25 plus years and have mostly worked on housing research, but also workforce development. And I am the co-principal investigator on this study, and I'll turn it over to Laura, the other co-principal investigator.
Hello, my name is Laura Peck. As Larry said, I'm co-PI with Larry and really excited to be working on this project. I'm also the principal investigator on some other HUD evaluation studies, have about 25 years of experience in evaluation research, and I've been at Apt for the last 10 of those. And good morning in Hawaii, Phil.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Garboden. I'm a professor of affordable housing out at the University of Hawaii, so west of almost all of you. And my work tends to focus on the housing voucher program and landlords' involvement or lack thereof. Let me pass it along to Elizabeth Rudd.
Hello, everyone. I guess it's good morning and good afternoon. I am Elizabeth Rudd. I work in the Program Evaluation Division at HUD, and I'm tasked with monitoring the contract for the evaluation of the landlord incentives, but only for a while, because actually I'm replacing for a short time Paul Joyce, who's the official representative for HUD on this. But Paul is home for a few weeks with his new little baby, Mary Colleen. So I'm looking forward to my time on this project.
Thanks, everybody. You'll be hearing from all of us throughout the next 5 years of this evaluation. So we look forward to interacting with you. So I thought the next thing I would do is give a brief overview of the evaluation. before we get on to the overview of the evaluation, we wanted to get a sense of who's on the phone, what are the PHAs that are involved in the evaluation. So we have a short poll for you. If you could answer the poll and let us know which of the flexibilities you're planning to implement. The poll will be up momentarily. It should be up for a couple of minutes. And you can check off all of the flexibilities that your PHA is planning to implement. So it's changes to the payment standard, it's all of the financial incentives and changes to inspections. So please check off what you're planning on doing.
All right, the poll should be appearing on the right-hand side of your screen. Just check as many answers as are applicable to your situation, and then click the Submit button to make sure your answers are registered. You have about a minute and a half left.
Hey, thanks everybody. And again, I just want to reiterate that obviously what you put in here is not necessarily what you'll end up doing, but it's good to get a sense of what PHAs are planning to do. So it looks like the two top things are providing vacancy loss funding, as well as sign-on bonuses for new landlords and damage claims for landlords that experience damages to the units. So that's really interesting. Thank you. So next, I will provide a brief overview of the evaluation. The evaluation has 3 goals. The first is to understand how PHAs are implementing the landlord incentives. So that will be a process study to learn about the process of implementing the incentives across the PHAs. The second is an impact evaluation, which is to understand the impact of the incentives on landlords, voucher holders, and the PHAs that are participating in the program. And then finally, we're going to be doing a cost study, which will look at the costs of these incentives. So the process study is where most of the involvement of PHAs will be, but I want to talk a little briefly about the impact study before we get to spending more time on the process study. So the impact study has 3 main outcome domains. The first is to understand how incentives affect landlord willingness to participate in the Housing Choice Voucher program. Does it maybe incentivize additional landlords to consider renting units? Does it incentivize existing landlords to rent different units in different places? And if so, what kinds of landlords are now thinking about joining the program? The second domain is the actual participation. So it's one thing to consider participating in the voucher program, but the actual, the proof is where the pudding is. The pudding is in the proof is in the pudding. So the question is really, are more landlords actually renting to voucher holders? And if so, are they renting in different places, different types of units, different landlords, and so forth? So that's the second domain. And finally, the third domain is, and how does any change in landlord behavior affect voucher holders? Essentially, the goal is to get people housed in good quality units. And so we want to know, do these incentives actually affect voucher holders and their ability to lease units? So to get a little more detail on the landlord domain, again, the question here is whether more landlords will consider renting to voucher holders once the incentives are in place. And that will get through direct input from the landlords, as well as through reviews of lists of landlords who advertise their units, whether through the PHA's physical lists or services such as Go Section 8 or Social Serve. So I want to do another quick poll here. The next quick poll is, can you just list how you maintain your lists of landlords, whether you have paper lists, computerized lists, or you don't maintain any list? So I think we get 1 minute for this this poll. So you want to start the clock?
Once again, the poll is on the right-hand side of your screen. Just select your answer and then click on the Submit button.
Meryl, you might be muted, or at least I can't hear you.
Thank you. Right, so it looks like the most common way that PHAs maintain lists is computerized lists, whether it's Go Section 8, Social Serve, or something similar. That's good to know. Thanks, everybody, for answering that one. So the next domain of interest is actual landlord participation in the program. And we have several measures of that. One is how many landlords are participating. So there's two ways to look at that. One is, are new landlords joining the program? And then is there a net gain in number of landlords? So landlords obviously always leave the program and join the program. So the first two measures are new landlords and the net number of landlords in the program. And then the third measure is, are people moving to new locations, and then are units more dispersed over the jurisdiction of the PHA? And finally, are different types of landlords renting units? So is that, by type, size of landlord, ownership type, property type, and so forth. Then the final domain is, as I mentioned, tenant success in leasing. And the measures there are the percent of people who get vouchers who actually lease up. Next slide, please. So it's the percent of people who get vouchers who actually are successful in leasing up. And for those who lease up, how quickly they lease up. So I want to just talk a little bit about the evaluation design. There's sort of three main components of it. The first is the process study. As I mentioned, it's to describe how the implementation is going. And that's mainly we're using data from PHAs and landlords to describe what PHAs were planning to do, what they're actually doing, why they've chosen what they've chosen, how implementation is going, how are PHAs communicating with their landlords and with voucher holders, and then how how landlords are understanding the incentives and how they react to the incentives. So that's the process study. Then we have the impact study, which looks at what's actually happening in the program. As I said, impacts on landlords, voucher holders, and the PHAs. Typically, many of you probably heard that the kind of ideal way to measure impact is to do a random controlled trial, which means that the applicant PHAs would be randomly assigned to the treatment group, which are the ones that get MTW, and a control group, which are PHAs then that don't get the MTW authority. And then you would look at the differences in the outcomes for the treatment and control groups, and you could attribute any differences to the treatment. But in this case, because pretty much all of the applicants were accepted into MTW, we can't do this random assignment. So we do something called a quasi-experimental design, which is as close as we can get to this random control trial, which means that we pick comparison PHAs, which are PHAs that are as similar as possible to all of you, to the MTW PHAs. So PHAs that have similar success rates, similar vacancy rates, similar size, similar rules on whether landlords can discriminate based on source of income, and try to create the comparison group that way. And again, that way we can look at differences between the comparison PHAs and treatment PHAs and attribute any differences to the MTW authority that you get to provide landlord incentives. The final piece of the evaluation is a cost study, which again looks at the components of cost, which are the changes in HAP payments that result from changes in the payment standard, the actual physical costs of the financial incentives, whether it's the signing bonuses, the damage claims, and the vacancy losses. And then also savings, since you can, some PHAs are going to either make inspections less frequent or not do an initial inspection. So there could be savings in numbers of inspections. And finally, if incentives also increase success rates, we can then measure any savings in all of the lease-up activities and issuance activities that might result from increased success rates. Another feature of this design is that we are convening a small resident advisory group, which is people who have vouchers or voucher holders and live rent with vouchers, to get their input on the data collection instruments and findings to make sure that they're consistent with the experience of people with vouchers. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil, who's going to talk about the data that we're going to want from the PHAs and all of the interaction with you over the next few years. So Phil?
Wonderful. Thank you, Meryl. And thank you everyone for attending. So I get to talk about the fun part, I think, which is our opportunity to visit each of you and to learn about your work and what you have planned for the MTW cohort. So our first visit, in-person visit, hopefully, will be this fall 2022. And our goal on that visit is to sit down with you, your staff, folks knowledgeable about it, and really learn about what your plans are going to be for the next 4 or 5 years. What types of incentives you're planning to implement, when you're planning to implement them, all that information. It's also a chance for us to learn more about the markets that you're working in and the unique challenges. We understand each of you are working in very different places with different sets of circumstances related to landlords, who the landlords are, how you recruit them. So we get to learn all of that stuff on that initial visit. And we'll also take that opportunity to work with your data staff to collect the initial list of landlords that participate in your voucher programs that you use to mark, that you provide to tenants seeking housing, and to work on your success rate calculation. So we have a baseline figure for that as well. Unfortunately, we don't come back for 3 years, but we will be in touch with you over the phone in 2023. Basically, an update to learn about how implementation is going, if you've changed your plans, how so, what roadblocks and what successes you've had in the first years of implementation. We then return in person in the spring of 2025 to really debrief on your experience, learn about the incentives you implemented, what changes you made along the way, collect some of that cost data that Meryl was talking about, and updated data, of course, on your landlord lists and on your success rates. The fun thing about the 2025 visit is that that's our opportunity to interview landlords participating in each of your housing markets. And so there's a lot of details there, but suffice to say, what we're doing is sitting down with landlords, some who have participated in your programs for a long time, some who've just started participating after the incentives, some who don't participate still, and learning from them about the incentives, what their experience of them was, what they thought worked for them, and what markets and what types of landlords and all that good stuff. So the third visit, the third touch point is much more of a more extended. We get to really get some of that detailed information from landlords. Next slide, please. So yeah, one more, thank you. So what does this mean in terms of your involvement? Well, the first thing that we're asking you for to help us out with this is to provide the data that we're looking for, whether that's on success rates or landlord lists. There's also going to be a web survey that should be sent out to you fairly early in this process to fill out. And to talk to us when we visit on site, organize just a couple. We want it to be a very light touch for you guys, not in a way that interrupts the important work that you do, where we get to sit down with core members of your staff and learn from you. Confirming the success rate data is very important. It's a very important outcome for this study, as Meryl described, and so getting that right is important. Providing this list of landlords, whether that's on paper or connecting us to the digital sources that you're using for that. Participate in the telephone interviews, helping us recruit landlords for landlord interviews. One of the things we may need from you in 2025 is just to send a letter to the landlords that we sample and say, hey, here are who these folks are. Here's why they want to talk to you. Make them know that we're not fair housing auditors or anything scary like that, and we're just trying to learn about their experiences. So that can be really helpful and has worked in past studies. And finally, providing us with the types of cost data associated with your incentives. So, what has this done in terms of your budgets and, as Meryl pointed out, were there savings related to inspections? Were there costs related to, vacancy claims, so on and so forth, so that we can look at how that all fits together in terms of the outcomes. So, hopefully nothing too substantial from your part, but we appreciate your cooperation and coordination with us on this. And I think now I'm passing it on to Anna to talk about next steps.
Thank you, Phil. You can go to the next slide. So there are a few key touch points that we will be working with you all over the next few years. The first will be coming up later this year, and in late fall or early winter will be the first round of site visits, as Phil just described. We hope these will be in person, but depending on COVID at the time, we will do a virtual site visit and plan video or phone call interviews as necessary for that. Those will be 2-day site visits. We'll be coming to talk with you and various staff at your organization, as Phil said, to learn about kind of what you are planning for in some of those processes. We will reach out in early fall to start planning for that, to get an idea of who will be best for us to talk to and start planning the logistics of all of that with you. The next touch point for data collection will be in about a year after the site visits, so hopefully fall or winter 2023. Again, those will just be telephone interviews. We'll hope to speak with 3 to 5 folks from your organizations at that time, just as a touch point about your work and how the incentives are going and what that process has been. Then the final point will be in spring or summer 2025. We'll do the second round of site visits that Phil just described. And like he said, we will also, for a subset of sites, we will be interviewing landlords as well. So those, for some sites, will be longer site visits. Will be about 4 days as opposed to 2. But we'll talk to you then about how the implementation process has gone, as Phil just described. But we'll reach out to you ahead of all of that, again, to coordinate schedules and get an idea and recommendations from you all about what landlords you would recommend us speak to and to help plan some of that. And then the final main point, the culmination of the project will be the final report, which will be published in fall 2026. That will include all of the various pieces of this study, including everything that we will be learning from you all through the site visits and interviews and everything else. So I believe that is it. I will pass it back to Meryl now.
So thanks, Anna. And there was one question that I just want to address from the chat. Did somebody want to know, is it a 5-year or 4-year? So I think our evaluation period is 5 years, because after we finish all the data collection, we spend time writing a report. I think that's kind of the ambiguity in terms of the time. But why don't we open this up to questions? You can ask questions in the chat. You can ask questions by raising your hand, and the moderator will call on you and unmute you. So feel free to ask us any questions that you may have.
All right, as Meryl says, as we move into Q&A, please feel free to place yourselves in the question queue by clicking on the raise hand icon. It's above the chat box. And you'll hear a beep when your line is unmuted, at which point please state your name and question. You can also submit your questions in the chat. Just remember to select all panelists from the drop-down menu before submitting your question. And if you are audio only, you can dial #2 to enter the question queue. And it looks like we did have a question that just came in on the chat. Can HAP reserves be used for landlord incentives?
And I think that's a question for our HUD colleagues.
Hey everybody, my name is Allison Christensen. I'm in the MTW office at HUD. So CHAP reserves, I believe those are just part of your MTW block grant. So once you receive your fully executed MTW ACC amendment, and that is, I believe it's the first day of the month after that fully executed document is in place, is when you can start exercising that flexibility. So I believe that is an eligible use. You'll learn a lot more about that at some of the financial webinars that will be held later on about how you use the MTW fungibility and how that works. So more on that, but the general answer is yes.
All right, next question is, will there be additional funding to support landlord incentives?
That's another good question for our HUD colleagues.
Video on there. So yeah, so the part of the MTW expansion is that agencies cannot receive any more or less funding by virtue of their participation in MTW. So there's no direct grant awards or funding that goes along with MTW status, but you do have the benefit of the MTW fungibility and the cost savings measures that you can implement because of MTW. So a lot of agencies have found cost savings due to those activities that they then reallocate to other activities such as self-sufficiency initiatives or landlord incentives. So there's not a direct, line item that you'll receive, but we hope that by virtue of your cost savings ability through MTW, you'll have savings to invoke that way.
All right, next question. Can we start programs like mobility counseling, or will that corrupt the study?
Meryl, would you like to talk through that?
I think that might be another HUD question, although I know that PHAs that participate in the mobility demonstration couldn't be part of this MTW cohort, but I don't know about other mobility studies. Allison, do you want to take that one again?
I think that would actually be maybe more of a PD&R question. Let's maybe follow up with that with Paul and get an answer back to folks afterwards. So I don't believe there's anything specific in the notice about that. It's not one of the prohibited waivers during the evaluation period, but let us get back to you on an answer with that.
This is Elizabeth channeling Paul. I'm not sure. I appreciate that question. Such a great question, and we'll get back to you about that.
All right. The next question I have is, following up on the reserves question, we have a good amount of admin fee reserves and HAP reserves. Can these pre-MTW reserves be used for incentives?
I'll take that one too. So this is another financial question. Again, you'll learn more about how your reserves and the different types of reserves, how those can or cannot be included in your MTW fungibility. They'll go into a lot of detail about that once you get into, I think there's maybe 2 financial webinars and also open office hours where all the financial experts will be on to talk about that. So generally, I will say that, these landlord incentive activities can be paid for with your MTW is fungible, can pay for these landlord incentives. So you'll find out what precisely those income streams that are fungible are in the financial webinars to come very soon.
All right, next question is, what are some of the expectations for MTW PHAs after the 5-year evaluation period?
Allison, I think that's another you question.
Sure, I'll take that one too. So after the evaluation period, the MTW expansion is set up so that you come in under a specific cohort evaluating a specific policy change. You complete that as a part of your obligation of joining MTW. And once you're finished, then, that's the completion of your obligation. So in the selection notice, we said that the evaluation period is going to be 4 years after the implementation of the landlord incentives activities. So that 4 years after implementation is when you're restricted with the waivers and where you participate with the with APT and the evaluation. And then after that, you're on your own to just be a MTW agency with no specific evaluative obligation. So kind of goes away after that evaluation period.
All right, next question. Will PHAs receive something from you in advance of the site visit, i.e. will there be guidance on what information you want and or how you want it presented?
Great. Meryl, will you provide some detail around that, please?
Yes, so the answer is absolutely. We will probably give you more information than you want on what we want from you. So we're going to be very detailed. We might send like a web survey to you to ask for the specific information, give exact details of what we want, who we want to speak to, the kinds of information, checklists. We'll try to make it as easy as possible for you, but you will get very detailed requests from us with plenty of time. We understand everybody's busy, so we'll give you plenty of lead time. Also, when we schedule the site visits, we'll give you plenty of lead time, to make it as convenient for you as possible, timing wise and so forth.
All right. At this time, I'm not showing any other questions. Again, if you would like to ask a question, you can do so either by raising your hand, either virtually in WebEx using the raise hand icon, or dialing #2 if you're audio only, or you can enter it in the chat. Just remember to select all panelists from the drop-down menu before submitting your question. All right. It looks like we have another. No, we don't have any other questions at this time. All right. Looks like somebody just put a couple things in the chat. Looks like we have. Is there a specific deadline when the evaluation period needs to begin?
Oh.
Meryl, or is that Allison?
Sure, I understand that question.
I can take that one.
Okay, good, because I don't understand.
So the evaluation period starts after the implementation of your landlord incentives activities. So before you do that, there's a lot of things to do before that is able to occur. So the first thing, as you learned on the welcome webinar last week, was getting that ACC signed and fully executed by both the agency and HUD. That's the step one. And then second will be working on your MTW supplement and all of the activities, both landlord incentives and other MTW activities you might want to implement as a part of your MTW program overall. So after that supplement needs to go through public process, needs to be reviewed and approved by HUD. After the approval of the MTW supplement would be when the landlord incentives activities would start. Now, how long that takes is kind of up to the PHA. It could take, depending on your fiscal year and when you want to submit your supplement or when your ACC gets signed, how many other activities you have. There's going to be a lot of factors that play into how that the timing of that supplement. So it'll be, once the supplement is approved is when the time period will be, but what that exact range of dates is going to be dependent by agency.
And I would just add to that too, that some of that experience is what we will be capturing as part of the process evaluation. So understanding what the onboarding process is for you, and getting making your decisions and putting a plan in place and implementing that plan. So that is part of the process evaluation for sure. And then, as Allison noted, the impact evaluation will look at the quantitative data further down the line.
And this is Elizabeth. I'd like to follow up on that. Just in case there's some confusion on, this is called an evaluation, but it's not an evaluation of each PHA. It's not like we're grading you. It's an evaluation of, can HUD implement these kinds of things, and would they have good outcomes?
All right, next question. If funding is provided in the future, or if Choice and Affordable Housing Act is passed, will a notice be sent to the participating MTW agencies?
Allison, is that a question for you?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with the the likelihood of that, or its interaction with this cohort, but certainly if there's any legislation that happens that or that affects MTW agencies, either in this cohort or overall, we definitely, we're a very communicative office, so you'll definitely hear from us if there's any interaction between any new legislation and the MTW program. We will communicate that to you.
All right, next question. Who will we be working with on the ACC, the MTW office or the field office?
Take that one too. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of the ACC because there's a whole, webinar on that. So I won't get in on the specifics, but, just follow the directions. You should have received both written directions and, the webinar. So I would just kind of refer you back to that. If you have any questions on, who you should be sending things to, always you can use that MTW Landlord Incentives mailbox is just a general mailbox that can point you in the right direction if you're having trouble with where to send things. So that's a great resource that you always have.
All right, next question. If we are currently providing landlord incentives now with other funds, should we stop until our MTW plan is approved, or help facilitate data collection and results, or not?
So I can answer that from an evaluation perspective, and then maybe Allison, you can answer it from a program perspective. I mean, certainly from an evaluation perspective, we don't want you to stop doing anything, because we'll learn about it as part of the process study, what you're doing now and what the comparison PHAs are doing, because just like some PHAs that are becoming MTW PHAs are providing incentives now, so will some of the comparison PHAs. And that's sort of the natural state of the world. And we'd want to compare, where we are now with what happens. But I don't know if there's any programmatic issues with that. I would hope not.
No, not at all. So if there are activities or things that you're doing that are non-MTW that you've been doing before you heard about your MTW status, you're free to keep continuing to do those. There's no restrictions on that.
And I just want to confirm with my technical counterparts, Laura and Larry, that for the evaluation, you would support that as well, right? Keep doing what you're doing.
I confirmed that in the chat too to everyone. I think that's
okay.
It's a really important point. Don't anticipate anything that you think that we might want except for data. But all of the programmatic things that you're doing, just carry on. And at some point, we'll spy on you and see what you're up to so that we can document it. As Elizabeth said, too, for HUD's understanding of how this can work in the field.
All right, next question. Will there be an opportunity for MTW cohort 4 agencies to learn from each other as we go along?
Allison, you want to take that?
Sure. I don't know if there's are there any specific opportunities within the research? I know some of the other cohort, but yeah, that's not for this cohort. Yeah.
It sounds like a good idea, but it was not part of the design for this. So
yeah. So there are a lot of great opportunities for MTW agencies generally to learn from each other, and this cohort is no exception. So we have the, all the webinars series that you're going to get so tired of our webinars, but we have a lot of information to share with you. So there's always, breakout sessions and chances on those initial webinars for agencies to talk to each other and learn from where you're at in the process. And then after that, we do tend to convene from time to time to talk about MTW through other just, general webinars and resources on our website that are available. And there's also, I know, other conferences and things that the industry groups sponsor that are available to MTW agencies as well. So it's a really collaborative group of PHAs, and I think you'll find that everyone's always, willing to take a phone call and learn from each other. So yeah, I think there should be lots of opportunities to talk to agencies, both old and new, along the way.
All right, I'm not showing any other questions at this time. Once again, if you would like to ask a question verbally, click on the raise hand icon, or if you're audio only, dial #2. Or you can continue to submit questions in the chat. Just remember to select all panelists from the drop-down menu before submitting your questions.
Did we answer the question about
I
who
have
will
a
be
question
working?
Sorry, Larry, you go ahead. Go first.
Thank you. You did catch that who will be working with on the ACC, the MTW office, or the field office?
I think that's for Allison.
I think we covered that. So there's a webinar on that, and then also I think written instructions were sent out. So it's kind of a longer process that is kind of a subject for another day. So just would refer PHAs back to that other webinar. And if you still have questions after that, just the MTW Landlord Incentives Cohort mailbox is your one-stop shop to get your questions answered if you don't know who to talk to about something.
I was just going to follow up on Pam Parr's question from earlier about the poll allowing us to choose just one. I'm guessing that had to do with the landlord list, and I'm also hypothesizing that so there were 3 options, if you'll recall, for that poll: electronically and paper, and we don't keep lists. And so my guess is, and Pam, you can confirm if you like, that you probably keep both electronic and paper records. Was that the topic that you were referring to?
I think she was referring to the based on the timing of when that question came in. I think that was referring to the first poll, which was set to allow multiple options to be chosen.
Okay.
But apparently they were dark and hard to see, according to another attendee.
Okay.
But the options were available.
But I'll also point out that regarding those polls, it was part of a way for us to start to get some information from you about what you're doing in practice. And so if the poll didn't allow you to answer right, or you don't know if you don't know the answer yet, that is part of what these fall site visits will involve, is us confirming all of that information. So stay tuned for members of our team reaching out to you to connect and get your actual data, as opposed to just a little appetite letter, as this case may be right here.
All right, and another question has come in. If the initial landlord incentives are not effective, could the PHA implement new incentives along the way?
Allison, can you take that question?
Sure. So I won't speak for the evaluators, but this, the selection notice is going to be where you look for all the things that you kind of can and can't do with regard to the evaluation. So there's a list of, activities that we ask that you not do for the evaluation period. But if there's not anything that's in that is saying that something is prohibited, then you can go ahead and do it. So I don't think there's anything in the selection notice that would stop an agency from, picking up a new landlord incentive along the way. And if there's any research implications of that, we can, defer to APT, but there's nothing in the selection notice that would prohibit you from doing that.
And again, from the evaluation perspective, our goal is to not interfere with operations. So if a PHA wants to, if it's okay with the MTW office and a PHA chooses to change incentives along the way, we'll deal with that in the evaluation. That's one of the potential impacts, or in the process study. So by all means, PHAs should, as I said, do what they're doing and not do things because of the evaluation.
But just so you know, we might ask you why. Why did you make the choice to do that?
We will definitely ask why, right, as part of the process study.
All right, I'm not showing any other questions at this time. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question verbally, you can select the raise hand icon, or if you're audio only, dial #2, or you can submit your question in writing by using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Just remember to select all panelists before submitting your question. All right, I'm not showing any other questions at this time.
No other questions? We probably can end. So I thanks everybody, and you have the you will get, when you get the information, you get the contact information for me and for Anna Mahaffey if anybody has any questions. But otherwise, you will hear from us in the not too distant future once your agreements are all signed and ready to go. So again, thank you for participating, everybody. Any final comments?
Right. That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.